Hello everyone, it's Vince Wellslangen again, and welcome to another edition of Classic Pasta Critiques. As I mentioned in the comic section of my last video, I won't be covering another Pucky Pasta. I will be covering Lost Silver the next time around, after this particular installment. And we are going to be reading and critiquing the original Laughing Jack story written by Snuff Bomb. Now, I am sure that most of my subscribers are aware, or that's kind of a laughable statement in and of itself, but I'm sure that some people are aware that I have covered the sequel to the story previously before, and I kind of had a spurg out, and I'll start Moralize. And while I regret my reaction to the story the first time around, I stand by a fair amount of what I said. But this time around, I wanted to give the original story a fair shake. I think it's generally agreed that the sequel is just rubbish. I think there are like a handful of fans, but even the people who enjoyed this story, to my knowledge, don't care for the sequel. So I wanted to go back and read the original story and critique it and see if it really warranted all of the interest that people had in it, and enough to where people are apparently clamoring for a sequel. It was a nice summer day. My 5-year-old James was playing outside in the backyard of our suburban home. Suburban. Look, James has always been a quiet boy. He's always been a quiet boy. He plays by himself. The tent's well up there. He plays by himself mostly. He never had many friends. But he always had him. He has always had a wild imagination. I was in the kitchen feeding our dog Fido when I heard what sounded like James talking to someone in the backyard. I'm not sure who it was he was talking to. Could he have finally made a friend? Being a single mom, it's hard for me to always keep an eye out on my son. So I decided to go outside and check on him. When I went into the backyard, I was a bit confused because James was the only person back there. Was he talking to himself? I could have sworn I heard another voice. "James, it's time to come inside," I called out to him. He came inside and sat down on the table, and it was about lunchtime, so I decided to make him a turkey sandwich. "James, who are you talking to out there?" I asked. James looked up for a moment. "I was playing with my new friend." Real quick, formatting criticism. New character speaking, new paragraph. That's general rule. James speaking and his mom speaking are in the same paragraph. I'm just pointing it out there. He was set smiling. I poured him some milk and continued to pry, as any good mother would. "Does your friend have a name? Why didn't you ask him to come have lunch with us?" I asked. James stared at me for a moment before replying. "His name is Laughing Jack." I was a bit taken aback by what he said. "Oh? Well, that's a strange name. What does your friend look like?" I asked, a bit confused. "He's a clown. He has long hair and a big swirly cone nose. He's got long arms and baggy pants with stripy socks, and he always smiles." How old is James supposed to be? Because I know it's kind of a, I don't know if this is a nitpick. I think it's something that kind of hurts my immersion, just a teensy bit. I think that his speech would be even a little bit more stunted than this. This is simplistic, but it's not quite stunted. He's a clown, and he got a big swirly cone nose, and he got really long arms, and I don't think he would mention the pants. He wouldn't care about the pants. Or the socks, for that matter. Again, I'm trying to think about how I've heard kids describe things, and they're young. They barely mastered the ability to speak, unlike me, obviously. I realized that my son was talking about an imaginary friend. I suppose it's normal for kids his age to have imaginary friends, especially when he has no real kids to play with. And it's probably just a phase. Again, this tent swapping is kind of getting on my nerves a little bit. Especially, we know that the story takes place in the past tense because I remember how the story ends. And I don't know, this might be one of the things where it would have been beneficial to write this story in the third person rather than the first person. Because the direction that it's going to go, it doesn't quite make sense. I do remember, because I know some people are questioning why I know certain things. I have read the story before, or I've listened to readings of the story before. Obviously, I listened to the Bad Creepypasta guys cover this before. So I remember certain plot details, and I remember the structure of the story, but I want to evaluate it, from my perspective. The rest of the day went by as per usual. I don't know if that's how you say that, or whatever. And it was starting to get late, so I put James into bed. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and made sure to turn on his nightlight before I closed the door. I was pretty tired myself, so I decided to go to bed not long after. I had an awful nightmare. It was dark. I was in some kind of rundown amusement park. I was scared, running through the endless field of empty tents, broken down rides, and abandoned game huts. The whole place had a horrible look to it. Everything was black and white. The prized stuffed animals all hung from nooses in the game huts, all with sick grins stitched onto their faces. It felt like the whole park was looking at me, even though there wasn't another living thing in sight. Then suddenly I began to hear music play. The sound of Pop Goes the Weasel being played on a squeeze box echoed through the park. It was hypnotizing. I followed its tune to the circuit tent, almost in a trance, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. It was pitch black. The only light came from a single shining spotlight on the center of the big top. As I walked toward the light, the music slowed and I found myself singing along, unable to stop. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought twas all in fun. The music stopped right before its climax, and suddenly the lights shot on. The intensity of the lights was practically blinding, and all I could see was a dark silhouette shuffle towards me. Then another appeared, and another, and another. There were dozens of them, all coming towards me. I couldn't move, my legs were frozen. All I could do was watch as the haunting figures drew near, and as they grew closer I could see, in all caps, they were children! As I looked at each one, I noticed that they were all horribly disfigured and mutilated. Some had cuts all over their body, others were severely burnt, and others were missing limbs, and even eyes. The children enveloped me, clawing at my flesh, dragging me to the ground and tearing inside me, and the children tore me apart, and I faded away. All I could hear was laughter. Horrible, awful, evil laughter. I think there's supposed to be a period there, and I'm not gonna. Okay, I'm just gonna stick to criticizing the story as it is instead of the structure of everything and how it's. I think there's some things that are not formatted properly, but I can say right here one major complaint I have about this sequence is that it kind of comes out of nowhere and it doesn't quite jive with the rest of the story, in that the approach that Laughing Jack is, I guess, taking is speaking to the child, speaking to her son, speaking to James, one-on-one. Probably telling him to do stuff or do whatever. I don't know what he would even be talking to James for. In a sense that I'm very confused why we don't get hints of their interactions together. Like, we don't know what if Laughing Jack's trying to goad him into doing things that he knows he has no business doing. But that's beside the point. The point is that this dream sequence kind of flies in the face of that. I think it's supposed to be foreshadowing as to the kind of horror that is hanging over her son's head. And I understand that, if that's the intention, but again, it doesn't quite jive. It doesn't quite fit with the rest of the story. It's kind of over the top, and it's so blunt and heavy-handed, and it kind of it kind of comes at the wrong time too. Like, this is something that I think would be best reserved if you're going to have a dream sequence like of this over the top and violent near the end of the story, instead of like near a little bit before the middle portion, because the beginning part, it wasn't great, but it started off relatively sound. Like, it was kind of subtle, like this kid talking about an imaginary friend, and mother being a little bit confused but accepting, like, okay, he's a young boy, he doesn't have many friends, he probably just made one up so he wouldn't be as lonely. I understand that. Like, it's a very solid structure for an opening, and then we immediately just jump to nightmares about being torn apart by zombie children and evil clown laughter and all this shit. Yeah, again, I think the writer Snuffbomb, I think he played his hand too soon with this one. I woke up next morning in a cold sweat. After taking a few deep breaths, I looked over and saw that it was a few of James's action figures were positioned facing me atop my nightstand. I sighed. Right here. Oh no. I'll say that criticism for another. After I'm done with the paragraph. James had probably woken up early and put these here. I gathered up the toys and made my way to James's room. However, when I opened the door, James was sound asleep. I just shrugged and placed the toys back in his toy box and headed out of the living room. A little while later, James woke up and I made him breakfast. He was quiet and seemed a bit groggy, perhaps he didn't sleep well either. I decided to ask him about the toys. James, honey, did you put the toys in Mommy's room? The toys? Did you put the toys in Mommy's room this morning? His eyes shot up from me for a moment, and then quickly glanced down at the cereal. Laughing Jack did it. I rolled my eyes and responded. Well, you tell Laughing Jack to keep the toys in your room, okay? James nodded and finished his breakfast. I had to go play outside in the backyard. This sequence right here, this paragraph should have came before the nightmare. This actually is, I would say, like, cut out the nightmare portion entirely, because this does a decent job sufficing as a bit of ominous foreshadowing. It's not like over the top. It's not like overtly scary, but it's like something that immediately raises the eyebrow of the reader. I'm like, something's kind of weird going on. I don't know, like, it feels like I think Snuffbomb probably had ideas for what he wanted in the story, and I think he was so eager maybe to get to the carnival portion that I don't think he understood how it doesn't really mesh with the sequence of events, like in terms of narrative structure. It's like, rising action, falling action is like beginning of the story, and then immediately rising action, and then we go right back down to building up to, like, it. It's a hill. Instead, we have like a little incline, and then it just shoots back up again. You know what I mean? I don't know what it means. I went to relax in the living room, and I must have dozed off because I woke up a couple hours later. Shit! I need to check on James. I was a bit worried. It had been over 2 hours, and I hadn't checked in on him. I stepped out into the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. I was getting nervous, so I called out to him. James! James, where are you? Just then, I heard a giggle come from the front yard. I rushed through the gate, around the front of the house. James was sitting on the sidewalk. I breathed a sigh of relief and walked over to him. James, how many times have I told you to stay in the backyard? James? What are you eating? James looked at me, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a handful of hard candies in all colors. This made me very nervous. James, who gave you that candy? James just stared at me, not speaking. James, please tell Mommy where you got that candy. James hung his head down and said, Laughing Jack gave it to me. My heart sank. I kneeled down to look him in the eye. James, I've had enough of this damn Laughing Jack. He is not real. Now, this is a very serious situation, and I need to know who gave you the candy. I could see my son's eyes tear up. But, Mama, Laughing Jack did give me the candy. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. James has never lied to me, but what he's telling me is impossible. I made him spit out the candy and throw the rest away. James appears to be fine. Appears? Come on, it's temp swabs, bro. Maybe I'm just overreacting, and after all, maybe just okay. There's some like quotation marks and not quotation marks, commas and periods that are not missing, that are missing in areas where they should be. And like, I'm kind of like stumbling over myself more than I usually do. Maybe I'm just overreacting after all. Yeah, there should be a period after overreact. Maybe I'm just overreacting. After all, he could have gotten it from Tom and Linda from next door, or Mr. Walker down the street. Either way, I'm going to have to keep a closer eye on James. Why don't you go and... Like, this one thing I'm kind of curious about. Why didn't the mother just go and ask him, like, hey, did you give candy to my kid? Like, Tom, that sounds a little bit like confrontational, but you know what I mean. Like, inquire about them, or ask your neighbor. Like, that's another thing that just occurred to me. Like, you introduce the fact that you have neighbors that you know on a first name basis, and they're, I guess, relatively familiar with you. Like, why don't you have them in being a part of the story where, like, you go to them and ask them, like, hey, Tom, Linda, did you see anyone, like, hanging out in my yard, like, or talking to James? Like, I would say one of the positive things thus far about the story is that the mother character is relatively grounded in reality, and while I think, I think this story has pacing issues. The mother character is reacting, I think, in a reasonable manner. Especially like her flipping out about the candy is an entirely justified reaction in my view. Like, my kid's been acting weird, and the next thing I know, he's talking about this like imaginary friend, and then I go into the backyard and I see him like somewhere he's not supposed to be, like the front yard. He's in the front yard where any stranger could be walking by the sidewalk, could have given him anything, and he has these candies in his hand. That's a perfectly natural reaction. They're going to be a little bit concerned. Yet, I think that the one missing aspect of her character, or the story in general, is the investigative standpoint that you would adopt at that point. If that were you, if that were your child, you would go and talk to the neighbors, or keep an extra eye out in kids, or have James like come inside more often and play inside where you can see him. So I think those aspects are missing from this particular portion of the story. And also, again, format is, because I'm looking, you guys can't see it, although I'll post a link in the description on the creepypasta.com. Certain paragraphs just run on indefinitely, and I don't understand why they break up certain parts and then like others are just like large run-on huge blocks of text. That night I put James to bed as usual and decided to go to bed early myself. Suddenly, I was woken by a loud banging coming from the kitchen. I sprung out of bed and hurried downstairs. When I got to the kitchen, I was horrified. Everything on the counters had been thrown to the floor, and our dog Fido hung dead from the ceiling fixture. His stomach was cut open and stuffed with candy, the type that James was eating earlier that day. My sharp was quickly broken by a sharp scream coming from James, followed by loud crashes. I quickly grabbed the knife from the drawer and ran up and moved up the stairs with the speed that only a mother whose child was in danger could have. I burst through the door and flicked on the lights. Everything in the room was knocked over and tossed to the floor. My poor son was in his bed, crying, shaking with fear, a pool of urine staining the sheets. I scooped him up and ran out of the house and went next door to Tom and Linda's house. Luckily, they were still awake. They let me use their phone, and I called the police. It didn't take long for them to arrive, and I explained everything that happened. They looked at me as if I was crazy. I searched the house, but all they found was a dead dog and 2 trash rooms. The officer told me that someone probably got into this house and done this right before making a quick escape when they heard me coming upstairs. I knew this wasn't true. All the doors were locked and none of the windows were open. Whatever was in my house didn't come from outside. I know the back creepypasta crew kind of laid into it for the the dog being killed. I want to point, because I was reserving this statement until the end of the video, but yeah, I think I will. But I think it's kind of annoying that the dog has had little to no presence in the story. Like, again, you could have it where the dog is actually like more present, and he's like, okay, the mother's napping, and instead of just waking up and like, oh shit, I need to go check on James, the dog comes running up to her and like barking like frantically, like something is wrong, and it leads her outside to the front yard where James is like standing there doing nothing. Like, the dog can sense that there's something not right, the presence of evil. Like, I know it's a cliche in and of itself, but it would give the dog more of a presence, and it would actually kind of lean into this bit more. It would be a good segue to this bit where the dog dies, because it would give, it would give some indication as to why the malevolent force hovering over them would target the dog first, because it can sense that the dog is trying to protect the kid, or is the only one that right now, aside from the kid, that knows it's even there. And I think, well, now I think about it, I think the only way for that to work, you need to cut out the dream sequence entirely, or again, take the dream sequence and then move it down after this bit, after the police come, and after the police come and everything settles down and they're being extra cautious when she falls asleep, then the dream sequence happens, because then it would have like it would have like led up to that. It would have built up to that moment. And I don't know. I have to ask again. What is Laughing Jack's end goal here? Like, Laughing Jack is subtly talking to this mother and is talking to the kid, and he doesn't want to be seen by the mother. He's handing him the candies, and then he starts flipping out, I guess, and like breaking shit. Again, this is one of those things where if we had gotten like, I don't think that you should have had moments where we see what the kid is saying to Laughing Jack and what they're talking about, but give subtle hints as to the context of the conversation so we can understand how Laughing Jack is interacting with the child. Because at first he seemed to be happy that he was there, but then the next thing we know, out of the clear blue, he flipped the fuck out and like trashed the room and made the kid piss himself. And it raises the question of why would he do this? And it doesn't. It makes you wonder, because the prior interactions that he apparently had when he was being nice and giving candy, making a kid laugh, what happened from that moment to here that made this like interaction go about? Again, going back to the idea with the dog, maybe the kid loves the dog and Laughing Jack is jealous of the kid's dog, and he doesn't like the fact that the dog seems to be aware of his presence, about to rat him out to the mom. And he said, like, look, it's either the dog or me. Or maybe he kills the dog right in front of the kid and like, hey, now we can play together. And when the kid flips out, then Laughing Jack breaks the room and like in a small hissy fit or something like that. Something that would, like, events that lead into each other, events that kind of segue to each other and make like logical sense, you know? But instead, we have, oh, he was giving candy and then he vivisected my dog and stuffed candy in his stomach. The next day, James stayed inside. I would have had him, again, I would have had him staying inside from the moment that he got candy from strangers. I didn't want him to leave my sight. I went into the garage and found an old baby monitor and set it up in the room if anything comes into the night. Why would you still... The police would not let you go back in the house. And again, like, I don't understand why the police were looking at her like she was crazy, unless she brought up the imaginary... In fact, even then, I don't think the police would, like, look at her like she was apprehensive, like, crazy about the mentioning the imaginary friend, because especially when the candy stuffed in the stomach, and my son was given candy by someone. Like, I think they're like, okay, something's not right here. I think there's like a stalker that's like targeting you and like was watching over your son for a while. They would not let her stay in the same house. In fact, I think they would even go so far as to put her in witness protection, maybe? I don't know, something other than this. Like, this seems like very unrealistic in a story about the extra-dimensional killer clown monster thing. I went into the garage and found his own baby monitor. I was going to be... where was it? I was going to be able to hear it. Oh, sorry. It's set up in his room. If anything comes tonight, I was going to be able to hear it. I went into the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the drawer and put it on my nightstand. Imaginary friend or not, I'm not letting anyone hurt my little boy. Soon enough, night came. I put James to sleep. He was afraid, but why would you have James sleeping in a different room from you? No, a baby monitor is not enough. You would say, James, you can sleep with mommy tonight. Like, a serial killer, a crazed stalker has been hovering over you for days now and broke into your house and killed your dog. Like, you would have your child with you 24/7. You would have him like, okay, come in, you can sleep in mommy's room. Like, I'll sleep on the floor. You can sleep on mommy's bed. Like, something, like, again... My initial praise of the mother character, I like that she was like making like reasonable assumptions about what's going on, and then now she's not acting like a mother a real mother would, unless she's just like remarkably stupid. I know she's not neglectful. She's just really dumb. I turned on the nightlight. Before closing the door, I whispered to him, "Good night, James. I love you." And then she super kicked him in the jaw. I'm sorry. I love you. I tried to stay up there as long as I could, but I don't know why I'm ringing the mother voice, but after a few hours, I felt myself drifting off. My baby would be safe for the night. How? Based on what? Why? What has happened? That would give you an indication that he would be in any way safe. You said it yourself. Whatever trashed your house did not come from outside. It was already inside the house that you really, again, should not be in. And I needed to sleep. Just as I lay my hand on the pillow, I heard a soft noise coming from the baby monitor I put on the nightstand. At first, it sounded like interference, like any kind of radio would make. Then I heard a soft moan. Was James asleep? And then I heard it. The laugh from my nightmare, that horrible laugh. I sprung up from the bed and grabbed the knife from under my pillow. I rushed over to James's room and creaked the door open. I tried the light switch, but it wouldn't come on. I took a step in and I could feel a thick, warm liquid at my feet. Suddenly, James's nightlight came on, and I could see the absolute horror that lay down in front of me. James's body was nailed up to the wall, nails pierced to his hands and feet. It's going back to Ronald McDonald House where people were literally getting crucified. Well, Laughing Jack is basically his real origin story was that he was one of the nurses that broke off, like, you know what, fuck this shit. I'm going solo, bitches. I don't need you guys holding me back. His chest was cut wide open. His organs hung down to the floor. His eyes and tongue had been removed along with most of his teeth. I was disgusted. I could hardly believe this was my baby boy. Then I heard it again. The soft, desperate moan. James was still alive! My baby, my poor baby. In so much pain, barely clinging to life. I ran across the room and vomited on the floor, but my sickness was interrupted by a horrible cackle coming from behind me. I spun around while still wiping the bile from my mouth, and out of the shadows emerged the fiend responsible for this horror. Laughing Jack. His ghost white skin and matted black hair hung down to his shoulders. He had piercing white eyes surrounded by dark rings. I would like, again, for this part, I would like any potential cosplayers to pay close attention. This is specific instructions on what to do when you want to draw fan art or cosplay as this character. His twisted smile revealed a row of sharp, jagged teeth. His skin didn't look like skin at all. It almost looked like rubber or plastic. He wore a patchy black and white clown outfit with striped sleeves and socks. His body itself was grotesque. Long arms hanging past down his waist, making poise look like almost... And the way he posed, I read his poetry or something. Pose made him look almost boneless, like a rag doll. He let out a sickening laugh, as if to let me know that he was pleased with my reaction to his quote-unquote work. Then he turned... Why is that... Okay, whatever. He then turned around. So I think that because there are use quotation marks. I don't know what the term is. The single quotations or whatever. Oh, whatever. I don't know. He then turned around slowly in front of James and began to laugh. Even more at the horrific sight that was laid out. That was enough for me to shake me from my terror, and I said, "Get away from here! Get away from him, you bitch!" I rushed at the monster, raising the knife over my head, and I stabbed it down at him. But as soon as the knife touched him, he disappeared in a cloud of black smoke. A knife passed through and pierced James' still beating heart, splashing warm blood on my face. No. What have I done? My baby! I killed my baby! I immediately fell to my knees. I could hear sirens in the distance growing louder. My boy, my sweet baby boy. I promised Mommy would protect you, but I failed. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry. Please soon arrive to find me in front of my son, still wielding the knife covered in my baby's blood. The trial was short. Insanity. I was placed in Ferropolis House for the Criminally Insane. I'm fairly certain they don't have... Okay, whatever. Where I had been for the past 2 months. It's not so bad here. The only reason I'm awake now is because someone is playing Pop Goes Reeds outside my window. I'll talk to the orderlies about it tomorrow morning. That ending is terrible, by the way. I mentioned I was going to talk about this. There was a point I wanted to make, a comparison piece. I am not sure how many people have seen the movie The Babadook, but this is almost point for point a the story beats almost remind me exactly of the Babadook. It's like the Babadook was someone read Laughing Jack. It's like, this is shit. Let me show you how it's really done. And the Babadook is not a perfect movie by any means. It's not flawless. I think there's a fair amount of shortcomings, but it's perfectly paced. You care about the child character. Like, the child actually has a personality outside of being generic kid, meant to drum up sympathy for when he inevitably gets hurt. The dog. There's a dog in that story that, again, I'm not. If you haven't seen the movie, I'm sorry to spoil certain things, but it kind of goes into my point. The dog the dog in the movie, is seen many times trying to protect the child, and it can sense that something isn't right, and it can sense evil in the house, and it ends up getting strangled to death. That's foreshadowed in the beginning of the story. In the beginning of the movie, so it's not like that big of a leap. It's sad when it happens because the dog actually has, even though it's meant there to, and you know it's gonna die, but it actually has a personality, and to see it protect the owner, it really actually gets to you when it actually does get killed. And this right here, this story kind of feels like it does those same beats. Like, even the Babadook even had a creepy dream sequence. But it was actually interesting, and it was more cerebral and surreal. And here it's just over the top gore. And again, that I would put that dream sequence right before. In fact, I would say right before. Let me see, right about after she says "Good night, James, I love you." Then she has a nightmare, and that leads into what happens next. Although I would kind of pull back a little bit on the gore within the dream sequence, if only to not overshadow the gore that we see happen to James. You can't have too much of it, or else it becomes one segment has to be over the other. It can't be over the top. If you keep going at 100%, then after a while you get tired out, you know. So the question is, how would I rank this story? Is this story any good? There are things I like about it. I like the kind of grounded tone. I like the suburban setting. Although I'm talking about the family dynamic. I like the mother. The mother character isn't terrible. She's actually something a little bit more grounded. I think that this is one. Used to say it a lot when it comes to random positive critiques. This is a story that could have benefited from being extended just a teensy bit, a little bit more in the way of detail regarding the relationship between the mother and the son, or the mother and the neighborhood that they live in. Maybe introduce a father character because she's a single mom. It's a father deceased, maybe introduce a father character, or even if you don't want to do that, like Tom and Linda, they alluded to them. They have literally no presence outside of being names of the people that she goes next door to use the phone of. But they seem to be friendly enough that she knows their names. At the very least, have them having more of a presence in the story, and maybe have them be the ones that start to doubt her, because it kind of raises the question why the sirens, you heard the sirens, the police were coming. Who called the police? I assume it was the next door neighbors hearing a scuffle over the house, although I'm wondering why it took so long to them to hear, because I'm assuming that James being tortured would have made some noise in and of itself. But whatever, I'm not a sound expert, I guess. So you have Tom and Linda, and there's insert a moment where she's sitting in their kitchen. They're trying to comfort her. She gives the details to them, and they find it odd. Or maybe they know her well enough to help her, but they don't know her well enough to really know who she is as a person. And maybe they just assume, start to suspect, maybe there's something going on in that house. Maybe she's something's wrong with her. Introduce a plot point, maybe that her husband died, and ever since then she's been kind of a recluse, only with her and her son, and people are kind of leery of her because she has maybe moments where she acts out, but she's very protective of her son, overly protective of her son. And that could play into like any potential insanity. Like she was so desperate to protect her son, it kind of drove her to lunacy, and maybe that's what their assumption goes to. And again, like I know for some people, like, well, she's overprotective and therefore she killed her son. I'm talking about a deterioration of her mental state after her husband left her or was killed or unfortunately passed away. Something that would make it again add to the family dynamic that we've seen here. It's there, but it's not as fleshed out as it should be. The bits of gore kind of rub me the wrong way. If not because I'm not strictly against gore. It rubs me the wrong way because I don't feel like it was properly earned or set up. Save for the dream sequence where it was alluding to that's where essentially it was going to happen at some point, or the mutilated children. I don't think we saw anything outside the murdered dog. I don't think we saw anything that would indicate that Laughing Jack would do such a thing. When it was set up, we had a decent setup. Again, it was a quiet, and everything was kind of gradually built up. Again, move the dream sequence to another port and just have the toy soldiers on there. And it raises the question, what was Laughing Jack trying to do? Was he trying to scare the mom? I mean, she wasn't frightened at all. Well, why would he just move the action figures on the thing? Again, this is one of those things where I think Snuffbomb, the author, had ideas for sequences that he wanted to implement in the story, but when it came time to implement them, I don't think he paid much thought to how they would play out when they're actually like read in order. This is one of those things where more than anything else, I think a restructuring of the story would make it at the very least passable. Like, again, move the dream sequence till near the end, have the toy soldiers up there, maybe add a little bit more in the way of subtle bits where the mother's being fucked with and she's starting to like really like question what's going on. Because even if you take out the dream sequence and just have the subtle foreshadowing with the toy soldiers on her nightstand, and then the candy, then we immediately jump to the dog being murdered and Laughing Jack destroying the house, like 2 rooms in the house. Like, that's not good enough. You need a little bit more to lead up to that, because it's such a huge leap. And it also doesn't fly in the face because Laughing Jack, for some reason or another, was obviously trying to win the child's trust and trying to like seduce him for God knows what reason, really. This reminds me of Mr. Widemouth, now I think about it, in regards to the malevolent creature trying to get the child to do something. Like, I think that's the approach that it should have taken, where Laughing Jack maybe has a kid act out of character, act in troubling ways, and the mom is starting to get a little bit fed up with her son acting that way and always blaming it on this imaginary friend. Something that would indicate some kind of motive for Jack, because I know, like, yeah, he wants to kill the kid, but why would being nice to him at first play into it at all? Why wouldn't he just give the kid nightmares and just to start things off? I think that was alluded to before with the dream sequence, a kid waking up groggy, like maybe he had a nightmare too that Laughing Jack gave him. But again, that doesn't really make much sense, because I think that the day later, let me check again. I think I might be wrong about this. Okay, it was dark, blah blah blah, nightmare. Yeah, like right after the kid might have had a nightmare that Laughing Jack gave him, Laughing Jack gives him candy the next day, and then he vivisects his dog. Like, it's not really lining up. The sequence of events are so janky and ill thought out that I'm having trouble discerning the real purpose of this character, besides just to be fat bait for emo chicks. I'm trying to think of how I would rank this story. Like, this story is, I hesitate to say it's outright bad. It's not good. It's, if I had to add an actual ranking system, maybe I would give it a 5 out of 10 at most, because the segments that do work, like, again, it has a decent like setup. I think the setup could have been fleshed out a little bit more, like the beginning portion. And there are moments where it has hints of subtlety and hints of decent foreshadowing, but then they're like sandwiched between like gore scenes that don't really line up to everything else. This story could have been a lot better than it was if the narrator had just exercised some level of subtlety, or at the very least like reread his story and understood that the narrative structure does not really flow effectively. So okay, so oh yeah, I forgot. I'm reading the comments here, and again, it's creepypasta comments. Like, unless the story is outright poorly written, like I'm talking about in terms of like poorly spelled and everything like that, no one will criticize it at all. That I find that's typically how creepypasta fandom is nowadays. The creepypasta fandom. The ending where she's inside the insane asylum and Pop Goes Weasel playing outside the thing. That is such a weak ending. Like, it felt like it's definitely felt like a case where he got to the points that he wanted to do, whereas like him accidentally killing her child and Laughing Jack being summoned and all this shit, and like, oh fuck, I don't know how to end my story. Like, again, like if you want to go with that thing where maybe the mother was insane, or the mother was the people thought she was insane, have the other characters in the story, like the neighbors, play more of a part, so there could be other people looking in on her and not sure what's happening, and we can understand that maybe they were the ones that alluded to the fact that maybe that she's seen as not mentally stable. But the ending bit, yeah, like her in the asylum, and also now I think about it, the tense in which this story is taking place, it's taking place for the most part in the present tense, and it kind of doesn't make sense. Who's she telling the story to, and why is she recalling it the way she is? Like, I don't know. Like, again, this should have been a story that was told in the third person. I would say maybe take out the asylum bit, the stupid Pop Goes the Weasel ending, like, and like have her being taken away by the police, and where it's very heavily hinted that they think it was her that killed her son, and as she's being taken away, she like rocking back and forth, and she's like humming Pop Goes the Weasel. Something a little bit more subtle than that, you know, something a little more subtle than, for some reason or another, she's in an insane asylum and Laughing Jack is like outside of her window still fucking with her, even though he only targets children, I think, is the prime thing. And also, but why this child in this neighborhood in this specific set of circumstances too? I don't like. Again, I'm thinking about the Babadook, and the Babadook was like it kind of had the same issue with, in my opinion, where for some reason or another, this kid's being targeted, but I don't know. Like, it feels like it was more of an inclination that the Babadook was more inclined to follow you and stalk you, or hover over you, depending on your emotional state, and everything starts out so average here. Everything starts out so normal, and then all of a sudden, a killer monster clown wants to target this one specific boy for no reason. I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to think of like story suggestions. Maybe that they're new in the neighborhood or something like that, and James finds a thing where it's like a jack in the box, and he opens it up, and I don't know, something that, again, sequence of events needs to line up. The story needs to have there's no tension because like the action comes so soon, and we're hit with gore so quick, and the mode of the killer or the horror character is so inconsistent that I'm not sure what I'm supposed to get out of this. It's not scary, which I don't know, like sometimes I kind of forget with these horror stories. I appreciate the fact that it's trying to be scary, unlike a lot of the other shit I cover for my channel, but it's not really scary. There's not a lot of tension. The most tense moments don't involve bloodshed. Again, it's the small little hints of something to come. The candy, the toy soldiers, James in the backyard talking with himself and acting weird about Laughing Jack. Those moments do more to bring up to add to the tension than anything else. and then you let it crescendo into maybe a gory ending. So, yeah, that was Laughing Jack. This is, I think, a fair question to ask is it better than a sequel? Unquestionably so. I have nothing positive to say about the origin of Laughing Jack, and I find it funny how, again, a fair amount of not a few tweaks, but a handful of tweaks to the story, and it could have been a very solid, like, maybe 8 or 9 out of 10. But it had potential. I just find it funny that Snuff Bomb would regret so much as a writer after this and write fucking the origin of Laughing Jack, where he would take all the worst bits out of this story and make the whole story about it. Just gore, murder, killing. Like, it's phenomenal. It's truly phenomenal. So, that's this little tall tale. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you like this story, feel free to tell me what you think about it. What do you think? Are there bits that you think I kind of skimmed over in terms of criticism, like something I didn't really hone in on that really stuck out to you? By all means, let me know. So I hope you all have a good one, and stay tuned for Pokemon Lost Silver. That will be the next video coming around, and yeah, you guys have a good one.